Оливера, на мой взгляд, это интересный пример того, как можно определить opportunity и успешно ее реализовать на российском рынке.
Здравствуйте. Спасибо большое. Я перейду на английский язык через секунду. Раз я в Англии оказался, надо порепетировать свой английский язык, не забыл. Но не могу воздержаться после того, что я слышал только что по поводу системы страхования вкладов и так далее. Вот эти идеи, которые иногда распространяются, что есть некие безответственное кредитование среди частных банков особенно, так называемые монолайны, которых нет давно, которые выдают и раздают кредит направо-налево, этого, конечно, нет. Есть некоторые карманы, которые появляются, очень узкие карманы, перекредитованности, но это проблема скоринга и андеррайтинга и вся кредитная инфраструктура, нежели какие-то системные проблемы, где банки выдают безответственно кредиты. И еще один момент. Я, конечно, хорошо знаю рынок кредитных карточек в первую очередь. Общий рынок потребительского кредитования растет, наверное, на 40%. Я видел 42% только что в презентации. Рынок кредитных карточек очень сильно вырос за последние 12 месяцев и, по-моему, растет на 60%. На конец этого года будет где-то так. То есть это сильный рост. Опять-таки, это не банки частные, которые разбрасывают эти кредиты. 25-30% этой выдачи – это Сбербанк России. Это не репрок Сбербанк России, просто я слышу, что это частный банк, который очень сильно рискует. На самом деле весь рынок очень сильно растет с очень низкой базой. Уровень проникновения кредитных карточек в России весьма низкий. Это на уровне 15-16% до сих пор. Это кредитные карточки. И эта идея, что есть общая перекредитованность населения России, это неверно. Россияне очень недообслуживаны и недопереинтегрированы. Это по всему рынку так. Есть куда расти. Я буду развивать эту тему в ходе своей презентации, уже переходя на английский. So, we heard amazing stuff from Jim O'Neill. Globally, China, Russia's place in the BRICS, then Russian macroeconomics and Sberbank in Russian macroeconomics. So why the hell am I here? We're a tiny ant in Russia. We're rapidly growing. We're quite visible with Tinkoff credit systems. But we're here because we're what people think of as a bit of an outlier, which is a non-affiliated new type of business that's growing off the back of the consumer boom in Russia. But it's not quite that simple. I'd like to show through our case study, Tinkoff, that there's actually quite a lot going on. So it's not just about the state, it's not all about Moscow, it's not all about oligarchic groups, and it's not all about oil by any means. We're a purely Russian company. I'm the only foreigner working in the company. There are over 3,000 employees now. We're built in Russia by Russians and built from scratch, from nothing. So this is one of those cases where you're seeing wealth generation, value creation going on by a group of very prominent entrepreneurial individuals in Russia, genuine businessmen, who find interesting niches, often in retail, but not exclusively in retail by any means, in consumer. They build up businesses. Some of those businesses are then sold, some of them are IPO'd, some of them are maintained as going concerns. Our majority shareholder, Oleg Tinkoff, who's Russia's answer to Richard Branson, is one of these entrepreneurs. He's maybe more publicly prominent as a champion of entrepreneurialism in Russia, but he's one of quite a large number of these emerging businessmen, and I'll develop this theme a little bit as we go through the presentation. But specifically about the bank, I want to try and break some stereotypes. I know you're probably just about to hear some worrying numbers about the level of state control in Russia, but there are green shoots, and we're one of them. So we're purely entrepreneurial. We are financed by direct investment of predominantly private capital in the beginning. We're highly profitable, we're very nimble, we're quick to adapt, and we're very innovative. I'll show you on a slide later that we borrowed very heavily and unashamedly from models abroad in the beginning, but now we're actually one of the companies in Russia and other emerging markets who are actually pioneering new technologies which are being copied by, let's say, companies in established markets. So it's not as it used to be, it's now the other way around. We're very open, international facing, we have to be, because we borrow money from the international capital markets as well as taking retail deposits to fund our business. There is no state involvement whatsoever in our company. We're completely unaffiliated in a business sense and a political sense. We have had no state aid ever. We're certainly not one of the 10 banks that we just saw in the presentation slide to receive all these trillions of liquidity. We live and die by what we can gather in terms of funding and capital. I should say at that point that we are heavily regulated. Well, one of the main regulators is obviously the Central Bank of Russia, because we are a bank, and the Central Bank of Russia is very active in terms of regulating, and they're doing some very good stuff. Some stuff may be a little bit rushed, but they're going through a consultative process, and I would say that they're making some very positive moves indeed. And the idea that there's lots of state involvement in Russia but very little regulation is incorrect. The regulators are very proactive. We've been to the international capital markets quite a number of times. I'm actually here this week on a roadshow to place a subordinated loan. This will be our 5th Euro bond. We're one of a number of banks who come to the international capital markets regularly, not just the large state banks. We're riding 2 waves of growth: consumer lending on the one hand, specifically credit cards, and online. And I'll talk a little bit in more detail about that in a second. We see our peers not as banks, but as the online companies. They're actually the people who we are in hand-to-hand combat with on a daily basis in terms of headcount, in terms of IT, programmers, developers, web designers, retail specialists, lending specialists. And we're not in Moscow, we're everywhere else. So here are the guys that we consider to be our peers in terms of us being an online financial services provider. And so these are some of the entrepreneurial companies coming out of Russia. They're all very different. One of them hasn't actually come out of Russia. They do. They're a kind of British company with a Russian founder. You obviously know a lot of these names, but there's some really amazing stuff happening in the online space in Russia. Kiwi, I think, Boris Kim is going to be presenting later. They're one of the largest e-wallet providers, if not the largest e-wallet provider in Russia. Yandex and Mail, I'm sure you know. Yandex is a pioneering search engine. Yota are an online infrastructure provider and broadband, but they're also expanding into online services. Ozone is the equivalent of Amazon, but in Russia. They've been around for a long time, one of the oldest online companies. Avito, with whom we share a shareholder, a Swedish investment fund, are the equivalent of Craigslist and one of the fastest growing online companies in Russia. Kaspersky, obviously you all know, viral protection. And us. In cyberspace, there are no chinovniki. So, we are riding these 2 waves. The first is the expansion of consumer lending from a very low base. Russians are very under-levered to this day. Obviously, consumer lending has been growing strongly over the last 10 years. It was interrupted a little bit by the crisis, but it's resumed rapid growth over the last 2 years from a very low base. If we're talking about credit cards, the level of credit card penetration in the economically active population of Russia is still only around 17, maybe 18%. There are about 15, 16 million active credit cards in Russia out of a population of over 140 million. That growth will continue. If you look at the growth trajectories, not the trajectories of how other markets grew, if we're looking at emerging markets such as Turkey, Brazil, Mexico, various others, Poland, they had long growth periods of around 5 to 7 years from a similar base of penetration, which is about 10% that Russia had only a couple of years ago. And they grew up to different levels of penetration, 40, 70, 90%. Different markets did different things, but there's a lot of growth to go. Russians tend to own their own flats because of the privatizations of and home ownership in the 90s. And they are under-levered with a high level of disposable income. It's going to change over time, but right now that's the fact. On the other side, we have the online explosion. So probably a little known fact, but Russia has now the largest online population in Europe. We overtook Germany at the end of last year. There are now about 73 million online users, but it's still only 50% penetrated. So there's masses of growth in online, in broadband penetration, and mobile. And like other things that happen in the Russian market, there'll be a leapfrogging in terms of mobile usage in Russia. So a little bit about the bank. We're branchless, and we are violently branchless. We are faithful to this creed, and we will remain so. This enables us to tap into this online and consumer lending wave. It enables us to do business everywhere, which is very important because the tendency has been, especially for foreign companies coming into the market, to do business in Moscow and St. Petersburg where everybody else is doing business. It's quite a saturated market, very expensive retail space, expensive people who tend to job hop every couple of months because they keep getting poached. So an overheated market, and it's a difficult market to operate in. The companies, and I'm talking specifically about consumer lenders here, that have done very well have been the guys who've found models to take themselves into the regions and deep down into the regions. I'll come back to that point in a minute. So here, I'm just showing the kind of evolution path of our company. We borrowed very heavily from Capital One, the US credit card lender who was one of the original monolines. Eventually it became a normal retail bank, brick and mortar, but they started out as a monoline through direct mail. ING Direct Deposits, we fund ourselves. About 50% of our funding comes through online deposits, and that's pure online, using our courier network for the fulfillment side. Debit cards we're doing, a bit like Simple in the US. Prepaid, we have a co-brand with Yandex Деньги, Yandex Money. We do cross-selling of insurance products. I see our partner from Renaissance Insurance here, so we're cross-selling their products to our existing customers online, so it's a bit like Virgin Money. And we also have a point-of-sale lending program, which is through internet shops, so it's purely online. So we're broadening our model into online, but we're doing stuff that is not done elsewhere, so we're now being copied. It's important to understand that the idea that people are sometimes stuck in this stereotype, particularly in Britain, that Russian is desperately copying everything that it can lay its hands on, there's, albeit very bright people in programming and IT in Russia, they tend to be the people who are putting out viruses and hacking into bank systems and whatever, rather than actually going and innovating. The innovation's happening, it's just for some reason being drowned out by lots of other stuff, negative vibes that people tend to latch onto about Russia. This is a list of innovations that our bank has come up with, particularly probably on this slide, as well as stuff that we're doing in online, which really is being studied by banks across the world now in terms of our search engine optimization, work in the social networks, contextual stuff that we're doing, mobile marketing, which is one of our biggest customer acquisition channels now. We also have a courier network, which is a bit unusual for a bank. So we established our own courier network right the way across Russia, which enables us to provide excellent customer service with very small fulfillment times in terms of how quickly we can get a card back to a customer, but also enables us to fulfill what people thought was never going to be fulfilled by a virtual bank, the legislative requirements in Russia, requirements of the central bank to identify customers face to face, which is why we can't be a pure ING direct in Russia. We need to eyeball the customer and get their signature. So we found a way around it. I mentioned our distribution channels. This is an important slide. So there are lots of companies in the regions who are headquartered in the regions, whose principal place of business is in the regions. It's not all about Moscow by any means. The growth opportunities are in the regions, and the growth opportunities not just in the regions where there's the cities of 1 million people. They're in the small cities, which are underserved generally in retail financial services for sure. In our case, because we're virtual, we can go everywhere, and we do. 40% of our customers live in small towns of less than 50,000 people. All we need is a post office branch and online connectivity to do what we do, online through mobile. Everybody has a mobile phone in Russia, just about. And so we're able to find these people, to deliver them a card or open a deposit for them, to service them through our remote banking platforms, and collect them if they happen to go delinquent. There's our remote platforms. We have an award-winning internet bank, best in Russia, according to Global Finance. Mobile banking platforms. I am a long-standing customer of a leading UK retail bank. I really like their service. They're one of the first, let's say, virtual banks. And I recently downloaded their mobile application. I was shocked at how unsophisticated it is. Our mobile application is pretty damn good, but it's nothing especially amazing in Russia. There's lots of banks with mobile banking applications which apparently blow the socks off what's happening in Britain. And we fund ourselves. So we, on the first slide, I said rather obviously that we're transparent. Well, that's obviously something that all companies say to investors and conferences. But in Russian companies' cases, those who are seeking capital on the international financial markets, they have to be, because they're under extra scrutiny from somewhat suspicious investors. Our company is built to be sold at some point, either strategically or through an IPO. We have to borrow money wholesale through the international financial markets. So we do Eurobonds as well as ruble bonds domestically, and therefore we have to be absolutely see-through. We are. We've also got nothing to hide, which helps. Our growth speaks for itself. We've doubled our business for the last 3 years. We'll grow by about 120% this year. Our ROEs are 65 to 70%. There's not many places in the world, apart from the emerging markets, where you can get that kind of eye-watering result. And our net income will be about $120 million this year. Thank you very much indeed for listening to the story.